shifting, but we are an available source of cost shifting, and so they do it because they can. So what I want to ask is whether the current crisis, which is going to be lasting years yet, is the time for a dramatic wake-up call. Maybe this is the time to issue a more fundamental challenge to citizens and legislators alike. Perhaps as we slide toward the point when public higher education in many campuses is at risk of being fully privatized, we should instead be asking everyone what the commitment to public higher education should be in a democracy. And I think that a union is one of the groups that can pose that sort of challenge in an organized way. I'm looking at the possibility of federal funding for the public higher education system in the United States. It's cheaper than nuclear submarines. It's cheaper than ICBMs that we don't need. It's cheaper than a lot of things we spend a lot more money on. So, if we could get everyone's attention, perhaps promote a basic principle. Public higher education should be free. We need an educated citizenry to participate in public debates in an informed way. We need to fund public higher education at a level that makes it accessible to all qualified high school graduates. We need to reform a system that too often extends poor quality education to the poor and a higher quality education only to those families that can afford it. The tiered system of public higher education in the United States is a scandal. And of course, it's built atop the equally tiered and equally scandalous K-12 public education in the United States, in which the poor also get a substandard education. What would it cost for the federal government to fund public higher education? Not Harvard. Harvard can afford it itself. The cost would be about $60 billion a year. That's the price tag for funding public higher education. Less than we've invested in corporate bailouts, less than we invest, as I said, in unnecessary weapons systems. Now, the struggle to shift priorities, it's not going to be brief, and it's not going to be easy. The conservative forces that have sought for years to decrease access to higher education are certainly going to attack this proposal, and I expect are certainly going to mock it as well. But I think it's nonetheless time for an unambiguous, principled national campaign. Public higher education should be free. Yet neither this nor any other major public campaign can proceed if universities are at war internally. If the internal struggle for resources trumps any potential unified face we might present to the world, it's that internal competition amongst disciplines that I think we now also need to think about. And I know of no other way to unify the faculty and try to produce a degree of solidarity across disciplines than through a collective bargaining organizing drive. I mean, sometimes the best way is when a union eventually has a strike. I have seen campus strikes repeatedly unify the faculty for a generation, because when engineers and historians and English professors and veterinarians and engineers are all together on the picket line, they sometimes understand for the first time what their common interests are. But short of a strike, which I'm not advocating yet, we're not even unionized, a collective bargaining drive itself and the experience of negotiating a contract and representing a faculty during a first contract negotiation can build a sense of campus solidarity which otherwise is completely lacking. And I think we need some force that hails the faculty in a unified way, or what we're going to have is divide and conquer. And we're already seeing divide and conquer start. It was nearly 40 years ago in a meeting in the Illini Union, it was 1971 if I remember right, in the midst of an earlier financial crisis in the state, that an outspoken and certainly irascible engineering professor rose at a large meeting and bellowed, "Why do we need a philosophy department anyway? What the hell good does it do?" At the time, most of us considered this outburst, which was given in much the tones that I just imitated, rather unseemly and unwarranted. And at the time, this is 40 years ago, none of us thought that we would see a vicious era that might soon be called the Disciplinary Wars, or the war amongst the faculty. We didn't think then that we would see a fundamental structural realignment of priorities in higher education. Of course, higher education did end up with some fundamental structural changes, most notably an inexorably increasing reliance on contingent faculty nationwide. 1975, 2/3 of the faculty nationally were either tenured or on the tenure track. Exactly 30 years later, it's kind of an amazing statistic. You feel that there really maybe there is unintelligent design in the universe. 30 years later, it had exactly reversed. 1/3 of the faculty was tenured or on the tenure track, and 2/3 of the faculty nationally were contingent. But neither I nor anyone else I know in the early 70s guessed that that was going to happen. We didn't see it coming. Public higher education would also eventually begin to be incrementally defunded by states across the country. But I don't think any of us really saw that as a trend in the early 1970s. So part of what happened is that the major changes that have overtaken higher education in the last 35 to 40 years were changes that at least nobody I know really anticipated. What I do anticipate, unfortunately, is a near-term development, which is that the disciplinary wars, the competition for resources amongst academic fields on campus, will soon be upon us. It's not just some humanities departments that will suffer, but certainly also qualitative social science programs and science programs in basic research rather than product development are going to be challenged. And I don't see any disciplines in that range that really are immune. And we're seeing debates on campuses around the country, because the AEUP tracks these things, where faculty members are beginning to complain about the support for useless research that doesn't really help the country's economy, ... And as a poetry scholar, I don't exactly feel untouched by those kinds of claims. What I think we're looking at realistically over the coming months and years